Today we have Patty Griffiths from well, a number of different organizations, but the VA Medical Center, the Emory University, and I guess from my experience, she's worked with Ted Johnson, who's been a great collaborator in many, or advisor, I guess, in many of our projects, and we'll try to do some proposals together, proposing some really neat ideas. So I've had a chance to work with Patty. I'm very interested in what she has to say today around how technologies can help older adults. And I'm going to let her give a little more information about her background, which was included in the bio, but I didn't have a chance to memorize it today.
That's okay.
So you're welcome.
All right, thanks. And gee, we don't know if Claudia's in labor or not. That's so exciting. But she's not here, so maybe that bodes well for her. And forgive me, I'm a little tired. I was at the ER. I became a caregiver, actually. This is sort of ironic. Over Labor Day weekend, I went down to Florida, got my mother. She called and said, come get me, I'm ready, which in early stage dementia is actually a gift. It's more typical to take them kicking and screaming, but she called and said, come get me, I'm ready. And went down, got her, and she went to the ER last night, which is, I'm trying not to take reflective of my caregiving skills. It was something else. So anyway, I'm a little tired, but I am from the Atlanta VA, and that's where my primary appointment is, and I have a secondary appointment in the Division of Geriatrics and Gerontology at Emory, and the Birmingham Atlanta GREC, Geriatric Research Education and Clinical Center. And I do work with Ted Johnson, as well as I do a lot of work with John Sanford. He's co-investigator on the majority of my projects because he brings in the environmental piece, which is so important. So I'm just going to give you a little introduction about who we are and what we do, and talk about caregiving broadly, broad strokes, and then give you a brief description of 4 studies that we just recently completed or have going on now, and then throw out some things for future directions, where we're headed, and maybe you can give me some input on some of the things that I'll talk about. So the current mission statement of the Center of Excellence in which I work, Rehabilitation Research and Development, is to improve the everyday function and quality of life of aging veterans with vision loss for veterans and their caregivers. And we just wrote a center renewal grant. So instead of being the Center of Excellence for aging veterans with vision loss, we're going to be the Center of Excellence for visual and neural repair. We're turning into sort of a neuro center, which is okay because we have a small group of us that we call ourselves the Center Outlier Group, and that would be John Sanford, Kat Echt, and myself, because we do more with the whole person rather than a neuro level, but we still have our place there. And so I have the Rehab R&D Veteran Caregiving Support Studies Lab, and here's our staff. Of course, you can't do anything without an incredibly wonderful staff. And as I said, my co-Is are mainly John Sanford and Ted Johnson, and Kenneth Hepburn, who's in the Division of Nursing over at Emory. And so what we do is we design, implement, and evaluate behavioral and psychoeducational interventions for caregiving dyads to help older veterans age in place safely within their own homes. So a little bit about caregiving that many of you are already familiar with. We have 66 million caregivers providing care to an ill or disabled adult in the United States. Close to 1/3 of all U.S. households is involved in caring for an older person, and they're caring on average for 20 hours per week. And what that equates to is $350 billion worth of unpaid services, which is more than double what we're putting out for nursing homes and home health care combined. It's a lot. More than half of family caregivers experience clinical depression due to caregiving duties. Elderly spousal caregivers have as much as 63% higher risk of mortality than non-caregivers. And caregiving is multifactorial. There's a lot of components to it, and by definition involves a dyad. And this is key because I'm interested in the dyad, not just the caregiver, but the care receiver. And it's sort of become trendy to call them care partners. And my last grant, I used the term care partner, but if you don't hyphenate it, it looks like carpenter, and that's a little aggravating. And it's really hard to tell which one you're talking about. Which is the care partner? I mean, is it the one providing the care or the one receiving the care? And so while I would love to be politically correct, I went back to caregiver and care receiver, and that's okay. And so some of the correlates of caregiving, I put satisfaction first because caregiving is linked to satisfaction. A lot of caregivers report increased satisfaction in being able to be there for their loved one, to be even through the death process, to be able to provide some nurturing. It's also related to depression an attenuation of the social network and a decrease in social activities, increased rates of illness, burden, both objective and subjective, and mortality. And that's, I won't go through the whole stress health process model, but it's a nice heuristic for understanding the relationship between some of the stressors that come with caregiving, the primary stressors being the disability of the care receiver and problem behaviors, especially in dementia caregivers and care receivers, and secondary stressors which result, family conflict, problems at work as a result of caregiving duties. And these primary and objective stressors, the relationship between them to health outcomes are mediated by the caregiver's appraisal of their own demands and capacities to deal with them. And so there's a lot of places for intervention in there, which is what I'm interested in. So why does the VA care, which is where I receive the majority of my funding, become overburdened, overstressed caregivers are more likely to institutionalize their spouse? And if these caregivers are institutionalizing their spouse, then the VA is going to have a whole lot of veterans in nursing homes that they're not going to, community living centers, excuse me, that they're not going to be able to handle. Keeping veterans in the home saves the VA money. This was my research assistant, sorry. And happy supported caregivers may keep the veteran in the home longer. Oh my goodness. Oh my. And it's the right thing to do. And the great thing is, right now, the VA purports to support caregivers. With the passing of the Veteran Caregiver Health Omnibus Act that Obama signed, we have money now to actually help the caregivers. Now, a lot of the first in line are the OEF and OIF veterans and their caregivers, Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom, for those of you not familiar with the VA acronyms. So they're first in line. And the chronic older caregivers, there's some out there too for them, but they're sort of second in line. But we're working to change that. Caregivers of veterans are slightly different than the caregivers in the general population. For example, 96% are women versus 65% nationwide. 96% are spouses or partners versus 6%. Nationally, we tend to see daughters, sons, siblings. 55% report a decrease in self-care activities. These might be OBGYN visits, these might be showers, these might be exercise. 75% report increases in stress and anxiety due to caregiving, and 88% decline in sleep quality, which was important to me because one of my studies is a sleep study, so I could use that in my argument. So some of the studies that we're doing. I have study in quotes, and I'll tell you that why in a minute. The first one is telemedicine support for family caregivers. This is also known as the Health Buddy study because we use the Health Buddy. The VA has a Care Coordination Home Telehealth Program, CCHT, which is huge. And they use these health buddies to help veterans with disease management. There's 8 modules to choose from, all the heavy-hitting diseases, congestive heart failure, COPD, diabetes, etc. And the veterans log on to these little health buddies every day, and they receive education about their disease, and they report the values, you know, their glucose value. And nurses back at the VA can read these on a daily basis, or I guess there's a 24-hour lag, and look for flags. And it's been a very effective program. So we were using the health buddies for caregivers, and I had study in quotes because it really wasn't a research project, it was a clinical demonstration project. It was a little bit different, you have to frame it a little different. And it was a caregiver pilot to develop a model telehealth program to help caregivers and then to evaluate that. And I came into this rather late in the game. And this was for caregivers providing care to community dwelling veterans over 60 years of age with one of the chronic illnesses on the disease modules. And they had to have a touch-tone landline phone, so these health buddies are not good with wireless, and more caregivers are going wireless. And they had to have a functional literacy above 8th grade to be able to interact with the health buddy, and then, of course, we needed dyad consent. 3x3 design, 3 groups, 3 times. Baseline, 3 months and 6 months. Usual care group, which received absolutely nothing. The Health Buddy Home Monitoring Group, which is an instrumental support group, and then the Health Buddy plus Phone Friends. So that was instrumental support. They got the education and the monitoring, but they also got emotional support from these phone friends who they were encouraged to call. They didn't call them very often. One is he's a PsyD, and the other woman is a nurse at the VA who also was a caregiver herself until her husband passed away. And so that is to show you sort of the limited utility of the Health Buddy. You have these 4 buttons, and you can press them in response to, choices. You can't input anything. It's interactive in the way that you can input that, and then 24 hours later, the nurses will download it, but there's somewhat limited utility on these devices. And the daily content was disease education, management, caregiver education, and then these caregiver tips, go take a bath, talk to a friend. And some trivia, which actually ended up driving them crazy because it was 30 days and then it would recycle. And they'd say, I already heard that. I don't want to hear that. So the results, and this is fascinating, at 3 months and 6 months, we had trends toward an increase in depression. We were actually looking for a decrease. An increase in burden, we would have hoped to see a decrease, and a decrease in self-efficacy for caregiving. And this is the RIS Elder Care Self-Efficacy Scale. We would have hoped to see an increase in self-efficacy. So why is that? This is my late friend and colleague Betty Rose Connell, and when she was still alive when I ran these data, and I called her and said, okay, sit down, are you sitting down? And she said, I am, and I told her, and she said, well, we were shooting gnats with elephant guns, and that's exactly what we were doing. The assessment battery was the elephant. We had this overwhelming, huge assessment battery. How often do you have to care for your husband? Is that stressful for you? How stressful is it? How many times a day do you change his diaper? How many times a day do you wash him? How many times a week? And you have no help whatsoever? Are you sure you have no help? Not even a neighbor? And so what that did, even in the control group, because all 3 groups increased depression, increased burden, decreased self-efficacy, all 3 groups. We increased their awareness and sensitivity to their plight, if you will, and then didn't provide them a strong enough intervention, which is a matter of dosage and intensity that we all need to pay attention to. So I'm the only one of the investigators that wants to write this up, but I think it's important to put out there, we need to be careful what we're doing, what we're asking of people, and we need to match the intervention to both the problem and the assessment battery. I think that that's very important information. And then we had some ceiling and floor effects, probably. A lot of these caregivers weren't actually depressed, and we may have had some selection bias. What was interesting, another interesting lesson in this, even though we had a fabulous staff, the veteran caregivers can't separate VA healthcare from VA research. And so they perceived us, in some of them, as Big Brother coming in to pass judgment on their caregiving abilities and thought that we might remove the veteran from the home if we found them wanting. And how do we get around that? We can talk till we're blue in the face. We can spend extra time trying to establish rapport, but that's an issue. However, here we go. Don't we love satisfaction inventories? 100% of the caregivers were very satisfied with the Health Buddy, would recommend it to a friend, had a better understanding of their care receiver's medical condition, found it easy or very easy to use, and would likely continue its use if they were given that opportunity. Okay, let's switch to sleep. So because caregivers don't sleep well, I wrote a grant to look at sleep in veterans and their family caregivers. That's also known as Sleepy Dyads, which stands for, the VA loves its acronyms, right? The Sleep Evaluation and Enhancement Psychoeducational Intervention for Dyads. Maureen helped me come up with that one weekend. I kept saying, help me come up with an acronym. I need my acronym. And so Ted Johnson and Ken Hepburn, and I have an external advisory committee, Steve Zarrett, who's a caregiving researcher from Penn State, and then Sue McCurry runs the Night Aid project out of UWash, which studies Alzheimer's disease, caregivers, and sleep. And then John helped me with the environmental stuff. I just throw John onto everything because he's amusing. So why sleep and caregiving dyads, and why this particular study? We have an increased prevalence of sleep problems for caregivers. We have an increased prevalence of sleep problems for care receivers because they are receiving care. They have many diagnoses which could disrupt sleep. They take medications that could disrupt sleep. Veterans have poorer sleep, and older adults have poorer sleep. So you put it all together, and these people will have poorer sleep. And our niche, our shtick here was that we were using a dyadic approach to sleep measurement. A lot of sleep researchers study the caregiver or the care receiver. We're studying them contemporaneously. And so we not only are using the data summaries that are spit out by the risk actographs, but we're going in behind and getting the raw data, and on a second-by-second basis, we have 30 points of data, and we can say who wakes up first, does the other one wake up, or get active or move, which is a novel way of looking at it, and it's really fun. And we also have, it gives us a lot of data points, subjective sleep in journals. And so, whoa, wrong way, sorry. So these are just some data from the Caregiver Telehealth Sleep Buddy project, Health Buddy, showing Zaret burden inventory and number of nights sleep was restless from the CESD, and there seems to be a relationship between restless sleep and subjective burden. So real quickly, some of the correlates of poor sleep are, there's implications for daytime functioning. People who don't sleep well don't function as well during the day. They have poor sleep hygiene practices. Sleep hygiene, oral hygiene is how well you take care of your mouth. Sleep hygiene is how well you take care of, what the effort you put into your sleeping practices. Decreased cognition, memory loss, poor judgment, irritability, anxiety, depression, huge medication mismanagement, and you've got the caregiver who's not only doing her own medication, but the care receiver's medication too. Accidents, falls, and institutionalization. So it's a problem. And I love this little heuristic put out by Spielman. It's the 3P sleep model that says that sleep, there are 3 P's: predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating factors. So we can be predisposed to sleep. I already told you that age, people who are older don't sleep as well, gender, and health status. And then these sleep problems, we can have precipitating factors. If I have stress, so the stress of providing care during the day for the caregiver, or some conflict or anxiety, depression, that can precipitate a bad sleep night. But then that can be perpetuated by the poor sleep hygiene practices. So to compensate for having a bad night of sleep, I'll drink a lot of caffeine the next day, then I'll have some alcohol at night, and we just get into a vicious cycle. Put that together for the dyads, and each cycle for the caregiver and the care receiver are interacting in a dynamic fashion together. And so where we're intervening is at the level of precipitating and perpetuating factors. It's a 3-phase study, so the VA funded this for 5.5 years, and phase 1 was just a nice little cross-sectional study, and I did that to buy myself some time, frankly. But I said we had to explore the phenomenon before we could intervene. That made sense, right? Don't you love when that happens? And we had proposed an N of 30, and the staff are so good that they knocked them off in no time at all. So went back to the IRB, doubled the recruitment, and said, okay, no, now we're doing 60. And so we've got 62. And we went back and doubled the recruitment because I was looking for more dementia dyads. And we ended up with very few dementia dyads, unfortunately. So phase 1 is the cross-sectional study. Phase 2 is when we're actually doing interventions. And phase 3, we do the revised intervention. And so we need caregivers and veterans over 60, and they have to meet the criteria for caregiving. And post-baseline, so after we put the actigraphs on them for a week, if they have a movement-related disorder or sleep apnea, they're excluded. If they can't tolerate the actigraphy, they're excluded, and people with dementia don't often tolerate the wristwatch. It's uncomfortable for them. And if they have good sleep criteria, which is generally described as either above 80% sleep efficiency as determined by the actigraph, and we're looking at subjective reports as well. So these are the wrist actigraphs. That's our center statistician who doubles as a model for us from time to time. They have an accelerometer in them, and they capture movement, and then based on an algorithm, the movement, and they capture movement, they capture light, and based on that, it determines sleep-wake throughout the day. These are some standard sleep parameters: sleep efficiency, total sleep time, wakes after sleep onset, sleep latency, and the number of sleep epochs or bouts, and the duration of those. And also, what is this? Oh my goodness, okay. They're very proud of the journals. We have these journals. And it's a lot of information that they actually fill out for us, and we had incredibly good adherence and compliance with these, as well as another subjective measure is the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index and the Epworth Sleepiness Scale. Huge assessment battery again. Didn't we just say that, oh, watch out for those huge assessment batteries? But we're going to have a very robust intervention to compensate for that. So we have some phase 1 preliminary results from the cross-sectional study with the baseline interviews and the 7-day sleep assessments using actigraphy. We completed with 62. Mean age of caregivers, 67, of care receivers 73. They're all female, 31% Caucasian, fairly well educated, and actually not too bad income either. They've been providing care, the majority of them, for over 2 years, over 40 hours a week. They're not necessarily preoccupied with caregiving demands all the time. This may be a select sample. And I only have 18% dementia, which is, I had wanted more, and in the 2 other studies we had over 50% dementia. And I think that's because we weren't giving them anything in this particular, the cross-sectional study. There was nothing to make them say, yeah, sure, I'll do this. This is asking them to do a whole lot of work and not offering them anything in return other than $40 per interview. So this to me is a little bit disappointing because the key thing from this slide I want you to get is 80 and 83, they're all sleeping well, okay? So I wrote this 5.5-year grant saying, caregivers and veterans don't sleep well. And, oh, I may be in trouble. So these are what the actograms look like, and this is the veteran and caregiver together. They're the caregivers the star, the veterans the flag, and we give them these, what did we call them? These individualized sleep analysis profile reports. And what this shows is the little green is rest or latency, the blue is sleep, the yellow spikes are white light, and the black spikes are activity. So what we would see here is she probably got up to go to the bathroom right before 6 or at 6 a.m. and turned on the light. That made him wake up too. He didn't get up. So we get those for 7 nights in a row for each of the dyads, and we give them those as well as we interpret them for them. And then based on that and the journals and all the other measures we do, we design an intervention. We're not doing this in the cross-sectional study. They didn't get anything other than our good wishes. Okay, so turning to the other 2 studies, this is Caregiver Assist and Caregiver Assist 2 or squared, which is caregiving assessment of skill sets and individualized support through training, and CG Assist 2 or squared is through teletraining. So CG Assist was a pilot project funded by RR&D, a feasibility study, which we're supporting the caregivers through a comprehensive needs assessment. Provision of assistive technology, which is in the form of durable medical equipment, grab bars, 3-in-1 commodes, super poles. Key, training on the assistive technology. Why are we doing that? Okay, these activities of daily living are a basic need for these caregiving dyads. And oftentimes you get discharged from the VA, and unless if you have an amputation, they may give you some assistive technology. If you're just aging into increasing levels of disability, your doctor has no way of knowing how well you're getting around. If you need a raised commode, if you need grab bars, and they don't ask this routinely. How are you doing your daily activities of daily living? Do you need any help? Do you need any equipment? And so they strategize some of the most resourceful ways to transfer, which are oftentimes very unsafe. And it results in injury or excess disability and disuse of the equipment if it doesn't fit. Whoops, wrong way. Oh my. Because oftentimes if they do give you certain equipment, they don't match it to the characteristics of the dyad, the needs, the preferences, or the environmental features of the home. So the objectives were to field test the measurement battery and the intervention. And in this pilot study, we're also comparing 2 needs assessment procedures, which was caregiver self-report needs over the phone, and then observation-based through the OTs and PTs, to see if we could possibly use one over the other. 2 by 2, group by time. We had 2 phone interviews by the project coordinators, and then we had 3 home visits by the OT and we had an OT-PT team. The first one was a blinded baseline assessment to look at features of the environment and observation of 4 functional tasks, so getting on and off the bed, in and out of the bed, on and off the toilet, in and out of the shower. And the second visit was to prescribe assistive technology. So look at what they had, meet with the dyad, say, okay, I really think you'd benefit from a super pole. Now, many dyads don't want a super pole in the middle of their living room. So we needed to have the buy-in of the dyad, and then return to train and reinforce on the intervention. And these are caregivers, veterans, ADL dependent, and dependent in transfer or positional change. We ended up with 19 in the intervention and 19 in the control. 100% female, predominantly Caucasian. 73% providing care for 2 or more years. And so, see, 54% with dementia, and I was hoping to get that in the sleep study, and we didn't. But this one here was so easy to recruit for. Here's what we're going to do. We'd like to come see how you do activities of daily living, have an OT observe you, and if she feels that you need more equipment, we're going to provide that equipment to you, and then train you on the use of the equipment. Would you like to sign up? Heck yes. And it won't be any cost to you, and we'll pay you for the interviews. So this was really easy to recruit for. And so the percentage of dyads requiring, this is 50% or greater assistance on these tasks. And you can see the caregiver is in blue. They were underestimating on every task except for bathing. Bathing was the most problematic task, which is not unusual. Once again, the safety concerns. How concerned are you about safety during getting in and out of bed, dressing, toileting, bathing? Yet, how satisfied are you with your level of skill? Both the PT, OTs, and the caregivers are saying, oh, well, they have some skill in this area. Yet, they replaced a lot of equipment. So the most frequently prescribed AT were grab bars and 3-in-1 commodes. And a lot of devices received more than one device. So they would receive multiple grab bars. That makes sense, right? And there's a guy with a super pole. So some of the issues we encountered on this was our PTs and OTs were not researchers, they were clinicians. And clinicians, unless they're research clinicians, don't always act like researchers. And so they didn't adhere to the protocol the way we wanted them to, and they took a more holistic approach. And we actually contaminated our own intervention because they would email or call and say, okay, I'm up in Buford, and there's this house trailer, and there's holes in the floor, and they lost their water, and she can't afford insurer, and what do I do? Well, let's call the social worker. So then, okay, what does that do to all of our outcome, but what are you going to do? What can you do? So, and it also had little effect on the caregiver's perceptions of safety, of dependency, of satisfaction with skill level. And once again, we got trends toward depression and burden. But there's a huge need, as identified by the clinical experts. So what we take away from this is, okay, the OT and PT showed improvement on, they were at a level 7 and now they're at a level 4. We're not going to get somebody completely independent, who's an amputee, but we decreased the level of dependency on the caregiver in some cases. We had this one instance where the veteran had been using a bidet to clean up after toileting, and he fell into the marble bathtub, got a hematoma. So she had been cleaning him up, and we installed some grab bars and a 3-in-1 commode, and he was once again independently toileting. That's a good thing, but how do you measure dignity? There's not really a good dignity measure out there. We had this other couple that at first glance we thought they had fold-down bed rails, but they were loose and improperly installed, and so she had bruises up and down her arm and had been dropping him. So we installed proper bed rails, transfer disc on the floor. He was an amputee, super pole, and so he could get out of bed and into his wheelchair in the morning, wheel into the other room and watch TV, and she could stay in bed for another hour. That's huge, another hour. So we wrote a merit review, and that's the CG Assist 2, which got funded. We're just waiting for them to release funds from the federal government. And so this time, instead of just looking at women spousal caregivers, we're taking all caregivers, because we had to turn away people. We felt really bad. And all ADLs. We're partnering with prosthetics, and social work. And there wasn't a T2 objective assessment for the OT. We added that. And I'm really interested in outcomes for the dyad. In CG Assist, we just looked at outcomes for the caregiver. But these veterans, many of them were completely cognizant of the burden they were placing on their caregivers. And they wanted to be independent. And so I want to measure, the effects of the intervention on the care receivers as well. And a delayed intervention group. It's unethical to not have an intervention group after you assess these people and uncover a need. And so we have a delayed intervention group. And then the telearm, which John Sanford really wanted to throw in. And so we did. And so the telearm, why the telearm? Okay, because telerehab increases ADL efficacy in newly prescribed wheelchair users. And that was a telerehab project from a few years ago we did. And we did find out that teleeducation is feasible with and enjoyed by caregivers. So in the telearm, we will have a new device that I'll tell you about in a minute that we wrote a grant for. And so rather than sending the PT into the home, we can send a research assistant, which is a lot more cost effective, and she'll set up this device. The teletherapist will be sitting at home dictating what's going on and doing the training that way. And we'll see what works with that. That's a very complex timeline. This is going to be a nightmare to staff, but we're having research visits at 3 points in time. The telephone interviews they don't cut it. I question the validity and reliability of the data we got on the phone interviews. And so we're sending a research team into the house at 3 points in time to do face-to-face interviews. And it'll be a team of 2 so that one person can be with the care receiver while the interviewers with the caregiver. And then we send an assistive technology expert to the home to do the actual intervention, either by telerehab or in person. And so the supplemental equipment request, a couple months ago, I was in Tucson, Arizona at a yoga meditation workshop because I had to learn how to do that so that we could train the caregivers in the sleep study. So it was very important that the VA send me there, right? And I got an email saying that there was some funds for supplemental equipment. If you need something, throw something together. So I did. And I asked for these BL healthcare devices. And we told the VA that we were going to use them, and we are, to monitor, measure, and manage. So we're going to monitor on a daily basis, instead of using pen and paper diaries and journals, which people spill coffee on them. People sit down and fill them out all at one time. People lose them. So we'll have these e-journals. And so we can monitor daily activities, falls, injuries, medication adherence, a whole lot of things. And I can use them for my sleep studies. And we're going to be able to measure veteran and caregiver capacity and performance, and then use them to manage on a daily basis to deliver our interventions. And the reason we chose this BL healthcare device out of Boston was because it was touch screen, which was attractive to me. It was much more interactive than the Health Buddy. It was 508 compliant, meaning we can adjust the font. We can have audio capability to better adhere to some of the sensory and cognitive limitations of our subjects. Has televideo conferencing capability, so we can have instantaneous communication. Real-time data collection. The data get collected on this device and shot back behind the VA firewall, which is real nice. And we can have pre-programmed messaging and reminders on it for medication or for whatever we're doing in our intervention. And then it also comes with all these peripherals, and we did get quite a few of those. Of interest to me is the pulse oximeters. I use that to screen out sleep apnea for our sleep study. And bundled into that request, we also asked for some Zoom tablets and videography equipment, which will enable us to videotape our own intervention modules and then deliver them on the device. And the Zoom tablets offer us portability, of course, and we can once again individualize the content on the screens and have pre-programmed data collection forms. And CAT-ECT is going to use these for medication management intervention. So, future directions. I'm going to use these devices, as I said, for the Sleepy Dyads intervention, which is it's a multi-component intervention. It's non-pharmacological. We just finished last year a couple of sleep studies over at Emory. One was an NIH trial. We just about crawled in bed with these people. We took over their care 24/7. We kept them awake and engaged during the day. because people in nursing homes, oftentimes why they don't sleep at night is because they're sleeping in the chair during the day. We offered activities, one-on-one activities twice a day, and group activities twice a day, right, Maureen? And we took over their nighttime care, so rather than going into the room, turning on the light at 2 a.m. and ripping down the diaper, we gently checked, and if there was no need to do that, we didn't do it. And we used flashlights. We tucked them in bed at night with a hand massage, scented lotion if they wanted, nice music, sleepy time tea. We woke them up gently, and it had absolutely no effect on sleep. So the argument there was, okay, it's because it's an institution, and there were too many environmental factors we couldn't control. So we'll be able to control them in the home environment, and I'm hoping we will. We're using an adaptive prescription approach, which is individualized to the needs and preferences of the dyad and their buy-in. And we're doing some behavioral psychoeducational strategies, and it will all be delivered on the BL healthcare device. And so here's some of the intervention components that we're going to look at. And not everybody will get all of these because we know that, so if it's not broke, don't fix it. Don't include caregivers in a depression study if they're not depressed, because it's just going to screw up the rest of your results. So we can individualize from a menu of items what each caregiver and care receiver dyad receive on a daily basis. So they'll use their telejournal, which is much more user-friendly, and it's more novel and fun for them, which will increase adherence and compliance, even though we had excellent compliance, I'm amazed. Programmable content and fonts and audio capability and instant access to the data for us, which is good because if we see, okay, 2 days have gone by and caregiver A has not done her journal, we can call, or we can program a message if she doesn't turn it off. So here's our say, all right, so they'll see in the morning, good morning. Please fill out your Monday morning journal. They can call, they can indicate if they want to be called, and we'll tell them when we're going to call them back, and they can indicate if they want to be, leave a message to us, and when we'll respond. And then it'll go into one of the modules. So every single day we're going to have cyber host for that familiarity, and then they'll have a thank you from the project coordinator, and then one of these things. So it may be a medical tip of the day or week. Here are some of the medical conditions that interfere with sleep. It could be nutrition. Here are some nutritional tips for sleep. Okay, and finally, so our Rehabilitation Research and Development Center of Excellence was up for renewal. We have to renew every 5 years, and we're becoming a Center for Visual and Neural Rehabilitation. And we submitted with that 3 areas with 3 projects each. And so my area was the telehealth core, and we have 3 projects that we'll be doing with telemedicine. The first is a balance and mobility training for older adults. Courtney Hall, who has just decided to go to the Mountain Home VA, was going to lead that, but now either Madeline Hackney or someone else will, and that's delivering the falls-proof intervention via the telehealth devices. Second one's CAT-X medication management for veterans and their care partners. And then the third, we're going to deliver this specifically with dementia dyads. We'll deliver CG Assist, John and I. And so anyway, thank you. And I would love to have any feedback from you guys on my negative results for the burden and depression, or suggestions for any of these projects going forward that are we're just getting ready to start up. Yes?
Zoom. Is the Zoom cellular connected or broadband?
It's
4G.
4G.
Okay, so you're doing it through a Verizon or something?
It's Verizon.
And actually, the BL healthcare devices, those, so we had to negotiate in the contract and build into the VA supplemental equipment request airtime and time to the configuration of the VA server behind the firewall. I mean, it's, as you can guess, really challenging to work with the privacy officers and information security officers at the VA to adhere to everything they want us to.
Now, so that would be, roughly, okay, if you're looking at the Zoom, that's a $500-something product. You've got $40, 38, whatever for Verizon.
Well, it depends on bandwidth. Yeah, I mean, data.
Yeah, really, they could do that for you. 38, they should be able to connect Just,
I've seen
from
them. We got
negotiations.
one of the early 4G sticks, and it was like, I think it's like $50 or $80 a month, just for the data.
Yeah,
There.
right. The traditional is 40 to, okay, so.
So we'll build that
So
into.
basically, is this all, so is the Fed going to, that's just base cost, that doesn't even include what BL has to have, plus the staffing. So is there an assessment of the cost factor in terms of this?
Oh yeah, we are keeping detailed cost for a cost analysis afterwards. We have to document all the costs for the staff and the technology.
One of the things we've had a lot of experience with is the whole commercialization aspect of this, and the availability of broadband or cellular or the different. I mean, we've been down the path with this thing, and it's a fascinating aspect. In fact, to me, it's equally important, to the overall picture because it gets into the heart of the affordability and the access.
Well, and that's huge, and it seems, well, with the way things are moving right now in the VA and funding, you write a grant, which it'll receive approval for funding, but it may be a year and a half to 2 years from the drafting of the grant to the actual funding, and things can change a whole lot in 2 years, a whole lot in 6 months.
I don't throw this up as a hurdle. I look at it from the standpoint as you look at veterans. A lot of them, you put up some of the incomes. Those, it's great that that there's income like that. On the other hand, when you start looking at solutions that are going to cost them a couple $100 a month, or it's a burden. And so one of the big questions, and frankly, as an industry, I hope we can do something about this in terms of getting access easier with the technology that enables.
No, I don't think the consumers would ever actually go for this. I think the VA would have to provide it. So if we come along with something that has proven efficacy, then the VA would have to provide it as part of standard of care. Even with My Healthy Vet, which is this nice program that's trying to serve as this repository of all the veterans' healthcare information and education information, and they can renew their meds on it. We only have 18% of the Atlanta veterans enrolled on that. So, is it 8%? 8%.
Our company's focused on the behavioral side, but the medical side is where, personally, there's been a lot of data collected on telemedicine, so you've got a base to spring from, and it would be really nice if, we get to the point where there's an assessment of dollars forward-looking, because everything is so budget-driven that it never gives it a chance to say, what is the trade-off? I mean, the readmission over hospitalizations, the amount of people that are ending up, not being able to age in place longer, so therefore they're ending up in, VA communities or whatever facilities are available.
I was talking to a doc in home-based primary care. There was a patient-centered care proposal request that came out, and I said, I just wrote a grant over 4th of July, and I wasn't ready if I was, knew if I was up for another one. And I said, do you have any ideas? What would you want, in home-based primary care? And she said, what I would love is a device that, in home-based primary care, they are seen once a year by a nurse practitioner and twice a year by an RN. And then PRN. And the PRNs are getting expensive, having nurses from the VA go to, Gainesville, Buford, wherever they're going. And so she said, if you could have one of your telehealth devices show me the purple urine, which was the thing that week, or, have somebody cough, or show me the wound, and I wouldn't have to be sending out a nurse to travel and, pay her for all that, that would be huge. So, we may do that, but then do you really have this device be in the person's home for all that time and pay for all that airtime? How cost effective is that? We don't know.
A lot of the veterans do come in. I mean, my dad was a World War II veteran, and I've been over to the VA with him for meds, and my God, that line in the universe, you know.
Well, we're working on our parking.
I mean, it's amazing the number of people. I mean,
Yeah.
it gives you a huge perspective.
It does.
Oh, care centers for the VA, you actually have communities that are intended for vets as like assisted living or similar? Or
Well, we have community living centers. They used to be called nursing homes. Now, with the culture change, we have the Eagle's Nest at the Atlanta VA, and we have some contract homes as well. And, a huge facility going in Carrollton, which will be based on the greenhouse model. Dr. House has been working with them, and that'll be exciting too. Hey.
So regarding the increase in depression and burden, did you control for, I guess, disease level at entry?
Yes.
And was there possibly, because you also saw it in the control group, is it possibly a deterioration that's going on, and so that everybody is just, the burden is actually getting higher?
I think, given the 3 to 6 months, we wouldn't see that happen, given such a short time frame. What would be great is if I could go back to them now, another 6 months down the line to see what happened.
Right.
I really think it's, and we did look at it by dementia status and non-dementia status, by duration of caregiving, but it's a small sample too, so we couldn't slice and dice it as much as I would have liked to.
And what did the users, or what did your participants say? Did they actually provide feedback saying, oh, the battery was so labor intensive?
That wasn't assessed, which is why
Oh.
we've got that the evaluation of the assessment battery into the next 2 studies.
Right.
But thanks. Yay! Our aging in place lady.
Well, my question is on the negative result, but it's specifically from the care for the caregiver. When you went through all these questions, do you think that it's possible that the caregivers put themselves in a place of where the abnormal becomes normal, and they had no concept of the fact that they were reacting to burden, to depression, to the situation? Then you pulled this information out of them, and it increased the awareness, so to speak.
Positively.
And then you didn't know what to do about it.
Yeah,
So
positively.
So
And
that would be the negative result.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hey, Brian.
2 things with the negative results and increase in burden of depression. As a intervention post-study, oh, by the way, are you aware of the aid and attendance benefit, which could get you respite, which could have someone else come in and help you out, that sort of thing. Because looking at your data, many of those individuals on a flashpoint there look like they would qualify. And especially if they're living in Beaufort in a trailer with no water and what have you, they meet the financial measure. So that is something that's the solution post facto to at least, now we've raised your awareness that you've got this increased burden and depression, but we have a solution. The other piece is for your study with the intervention with the telehealth. Would it not be more economical to have, as we did with the stroke thing, with the CNA go out, much less expensive than a nurse, and have a mobile camera that goes on the milk route to each one of these veterans' homes, as opposed to having it reside in the home and having to pay for that airtime?
Oh, no, that's okay. I wasn't clear there. It is the Stellar stroke telerehab model that you were involved in. So there's the in-person traditional group, and for the tele group, it will be a CNA or an RA going out with the equipment. She won't leave it in the house, and the therapist sitting back, in the office or wherever she is. Your other point, I'm building into everything I do now, measures on awareness of access to and utilization of community and VA resources. That's huge. And that could be a study in and of itself. I'm sliding it into everything I'm doing, but I really think it warrants a whole study on awareness, access, and utilization, for resources, because people have no idea what's available to them.
Because they're tied up being a caregiver. Or
Right.
They never, I personally am on the bandwagon of the fact that we're so focused on looking young that we never want to consider growing old. And we always wait till crisis.
Right.
And because we
Right.
wait till crisis, we
haven't planned anything, so we have no idea what resources are out there.
Well, and actually, I was on the internet the other day. Massachusetts has an excellent caregiver resource repository. I love their website. It's very straightforward. Georgia, we're not so great yet, and so I mean, I think we need to design one.
Well, and in AIPC, that's what we've got going on with the National Aging in Place Council, is a resource for all these different.
I'm on the same council that he is, among other things.
Well, so are you designing a website that's going to collate all this?
No, we designed, well, we first designed the presentation as a first module, and then we're getting feedback from that presentation, giving it to people in the community, basically, as well as caregivers and case managers, social workers, et cetera, giving an overall module, and then getting feedback from people, which is coming in. What do you want us to go down to for the next level module? What do you need to know more of? So that our goal is to be able to continually give this information out and increase the awareness of, as everybody says, we in the business, we know a lot of what's out there, and it's always amazing how many people have no clue as to how much is available.
You know, Patricia, one thing that I would like to see, and maybe our forum here is a good one for it, because you always need a platform to launch things from, but there really needs to be a better description of the continuum, because when you are able to pick people up at an earlier age, because of the telehealth issue, to try to balance the amount of care required to take care of U.S. veterans. So you've got a specific, you've got a very specific mission. And in effect, what you're doing is you're, through assessment, you're figuring out how to train the family on how to take care of, seniors aging. And, whatever the case may be, I mean, like you said, it could be diabetes, it could be COPD, which is very, that's a very serious thing because, every day lung capacity is lost, all kinds of other problems, fly from it. So, what Scott referenced is, kind of like, that moment when all of a sudden something happens to a parent, and then you've got the, you've got the adult child in play. Your circumstance is very unique. I know you know that. That your mom was ready to go. And
right.
Ready, but I deal with this all the time. In fact, we have a couple people over at the ATDC that, their parents just all of a sudden, they got the big shock. Mom's in the hospital. She lives in, a small town in Alabama. The reason why she's in the hospital is because she overdosed on her medications. The reason why that happened was because she couldn't remember whether she had taken it or not. So she took it again, and she ended up overdosing. Ends up in the hospital, and they tell you that they're not going to release her unless it's to you or to a nursing home, because she no longer can live on her own. This will happen again. So that's the first big shock that the baby boomer gets. So right off the bat, the continuum starts with education, being able to communicate back to the care provider, and that's more of a medical-based communication. Then, if dementia hits, which is one of the big things that causes this, then you've got a phase that you're in, and the emergency, throws people automatically into a series of decisions that they're not usually well equipped to handle. Do I do it with home health? Do I do it with assisted living? What is the necessary?
Bye.
The other piece that we're focused on is capturing those people between 50 and 65 and educating them to the one fact that 75% of us, wherever we live, at age 65, that's where we're going to live until we cannot. So if you have designed at age 65 a home that you can die in, you can do so. So in other words, already have the wide doorways, already have a zero-line shower, have a lower microwave, have a front-loading washer and dryer, yada, yada, yada. You do all of that ahead of time, and it's proactive, and now you're ready for whatever comes down the pike. And it's not medical. It doesn't look medical. It's aesthetically pleasing.
You're not only ready for anything that comes down the pipe, but you're decreasing the probability of accidents and injuries and falls.
Educating, we're working with church groups and other folks in that 50 to 65 range, just to say, okay, for a brief period of time, quit focusing on being young and consider yourself being old. And how would you, because if you do it now, you're economically stable, your health's probably pretty good, you're in a position to do it, rather than reactive trying to say, oh my God, we've got to remodel the whole house.
Can you believe I live in a house that doesn't have a master on the main? And I'm thinking about putting one in for my mother. Now, my mother was an RN up until 14 months ago. She was working as an RN on a dementia unit. And so what is very interesting is she was up close and personal with the whole dementia trajectory. She knows exactly what she's looking at. And so she is very unusual in that case, where she would say, come get me.
I could at least count certainly quite a few of my friends opposite your experience did have the normal one when Scott is talking about, and I'm a perfect example. When I was transferred to Atlanta, Georgia, my mother was going to come with me. I had to find a house on the first floor. First, I mean, I had to find a ranch. I had to find something. I looked at everything based on how it would be adaptable to her needs. And what, 1 out of 100 houses in the area that I was looking at might have been like that. But in your role in dealing with the VA, both caregivers and care receivers and families, the education component of what Scott is trying to was explaining very well, in getting to the people that are in their 50s, the children of the veterans that they're not there yet. They might be very soon, and they have some health issues that they might develop more, but to get the educational component to them prior to...
And it's a marketing issue. You know, we have to market this information, and how do we do that? We had November is National Caregivers Month, and we had a fair last year, or a whole month of activities planned, and we had very poor attendance. We had staff there, but not a lot of
And
caregivers.
look at the